George Washington, a hero of the Revolution, founder of the United States, and the country's first president. However, behind the grand image of a revered leader, there's a very sad personal story, full of suffering and sacrifice. We may know little about his heroic struggles, but what about the darker, more challenging sides of his personal life? Here's the sad story of George Washington. Part 1. Washington's early life. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was the son of Augustine Washington and Mary Ball Washington. From an early age, Washington experienced hardship and loss. When he was just 11 years old, his father passed away, leaving his family in challenging circumstances. After his father's death, George became the young head of the family, taking care of the farm and the estate left behind. Life for the Washington family was not easy, and financial hardship began to haunt them. George felt a huge responsibility on his shoulders. Part 2. A strenuous military career. At the age of 20, Washington began his military career as a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. However, his early career on the battlefield did not go smoothly. He experienced numerous defeats and failures, including in the 1754 Battle of Great Meadows, where his army was defeated by the French army. This moment marked the beginning of many hardships in his life. Washington experienced deep shame and disappointment because of this failure. However, these experiences taught him valuable lessons and shaped his future leadership character. However, the hardships did not stop there. The conflict between Britain and France, known as the 7 Years' War, tested Washington's abilities even further. Part 3. Profound loss. After the war, Washington's personal life was not free from grief either. In 1759, he married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children from a previous marriage. However, although they lived in luxury, George often felt lonely and depressed. Martha also suffered from poor health very often, and over the years, Washington had to care for her with great patience. However, even sadder was the fact that George never had any biological children. Although he loved Martha's children dearly, he felt a loss within himself that was never filled. Part 4. Constancy in the American Revolution. In 1775, when the American Revolution erupted, Washington was chosen to lead the Continental Army, but a greater struggle awaited Washington on the battlefield. Not only did he have to face a much stronger British army, but he also had to deal with hunger, disease, and despair from his troops. For several years, Washington had to lead an army that was short on supplies, and many times he had to face the harsh reality that his troops were in dire straits. One particularly distressing moment was when they were forced to retreat from New York City, which symbolized their inability to achieve victory. In addition, the severe illnesses suffered by many soldiers, such as smallpox and typhus, made him feel even more depressed. He had to see many friends and soldiers die in terrible conditions, and this shook his spirit. Part 5. Disappointments and Sacrifices. During the presidency. After the victory of the Revolution, George Washington became the first president of the United States in 1789. However, although he succeeded in establishing the foundations of a new government, his tenure was not a happy one. One of his biggest disappointments was his inability to unite all elements of the newly formed nation. During his administration, Washington felt isolated due to the many disagreements between the political factions. He was also under immense pressure to be the perfect figurehead, feeling that his decisions had to be the best for the nation. This burden was compounded when he witnessed the divisions between his friends, especially with Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Part 6. End of Life and Legacy. At the end of his life, Washington again suffered from health problems. In December 1799, he contracted a severe throat infection and died just a few days later. The loss of a great leader like Washington brought deep sadness to the American nation. He died at the age of 67, but his legacy lives on to this day. George Washington was a highly revered figure, but his life story shows that behind the success and fame, there were many personal sacrifices, grief, and suffering. The hero, we know, not only fought for his country's freedom, but also struggled with trials in his own life. Part 7. Leadership Transition. After Washington died, the United States did not immediately fall into chaos, but the transition of leadership brought its own challenges. The second president, John Adams, had to carry the heavy burden of maintaining the country's foundations. Key points: successor leadership. John Adams, who had previously served as vice president, assumed leadership amid fears of diminishing political stability. Differing political visions. There were disagreements between the Federalists, who favored a strong central government, and the Democratic Republicans, who wanted a more decentralized government. Internal and external threats. America still had to deal with problems such as political espionage, immigration issues, and pressure from European powers who wanted to intervene again. In this era, differences in political views began to emerge. Although Washington has established important traditions such as the peaceful change of leadership, tensions between political factions have begun to emerge, which will affect future political dynamics. Part 8. Social and economic impact. Not only have politics shifted, but social and economic conditions have also shown interesting dynamics post-Washington. Let's discuss some of the important aspects. First, economic conditions. During this transition period, the American economy was still dependent on agriculture and trade. International trade. Although Washington's death brought concerns about stability, international trade continued. However, the country faces challenges in the form of trade wars and global economic uncertainty, industry and innovation. The emergence of small factories and an increase in local production were indications that America was beginning to embark on the road to industrialization, albeit on a limited scale. Second, social conditions. The social dynamics of the time were influenced by population growth. With a growing population, especially in coastal areas, there was an increase in urbanization and the development of large cities. Education and culture. Although the education system was still in its infancy, the spirit to improve knowledge and culture was alive, as a provision to build a developed nation. Slavery issues. One issue that is beginning to come to the fore is slavery. Although the discourse on freedom and equal rights dates back to the Revolution, social reality shows that there are contradictions that will be the seeds of conflict in the future. Part 9. Foreign Policy and International Challenges. Abroad, the newly independent United States faced enormous challenges in establishing its position on the world stage. Key points: neutrality policy. One of the important policies adopted by the John Adams administration was to maintain neutrality in European conflicts. This policy aimed at avoiding involvement that could destabilize domestic affairs. Relations with Europe. America had to deal with major European countries, especially Britain and France, which still had strong colonial ambitions and influence in the world. Trade agreements and diplomacy. To protect its economic and political interests, America began to forge diplomatic relations as well as trade agreements with some European countries. However, these negotiations were not always smooth, given differences in political systems and national interests. The foreign policies adopted during this period form the basis of America's international relations, which are still influential today. While the decision to remain neutral reduced the risk of direct conflict, diplomatic and trade challenges remain a major test of the new administration's policies. Part 10. Washington's Legacy and Its Implications. One of the most interesting things is how George Washington's legacy influenced the post-death period. Washington not only left behind an example of leadership, but also traditions and values that continue to live on in the American political system. Some key legacies: peaceful transition of power. The tradition of peaceful transfer of power introduced by Washington laid the foundation for American democracy. Despite political disagreements and conflicts, the constitutional system remains the cornerstone. National values. Washington's spirit of unity, justice, and courage inspired succeeding leaders. It was these values that helped the American nation survive through difficult times and transitions. Formation of national identity. After his death, Washington's ideology and policies played a major role in the formation of America's national identity. People began to see themselves not just as citizens of different states, but as part of a large and united nation. This legacy laid the foundation for how America shaped itself as an independent and sovereign nation, despite the challenging road to political and economic maturity. Thank you for watching the sad story of George Washington. A long journey that teaches us that every success comes at a high price. If you were inspired by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to let more people know about the other side of one of America's greatest heroes. See you in the next video.